Hello, everyone. This is Orina, and I have a great privilege to be welcoming on the show Dr. David Grant, who is here with me. Hello, David.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Just a short introduction. Usually the podcast is in Polish, but some episodes are recorded in English, and I have a great privilege to be welcoming on the show amazing guests. Just to introduce you, David, you are a psychotherapist, you are a writer, you are a lecturer and performance coach, and humanitarian. You are famous for discovering an amazing method that we will be talking about today, Brainspotting. And also, maybe for those who are listening to us from Poland, I would like to say that also the reason why we're meeting today is just very newly released book of yours. It's a book in Polish, Brainspotting, nowa rewolucyjna metoda zapewniająca szybkie i trwałe zmiany w terapii, którą bardzo polecam. I recommend it from the depth of my heart because I'm a huge fan of your work.
One thing I want to say is I didn't discover brain spotting. I noticed brain spotting. And that's a very important distinction because the relevance of our eyes and where we look and the reflexes on our eyes to what we're carrying inside of our nervous systems was there for anybody to see. And we will see it implicitly every day. Okay. And so I didn't discover something that was already there.
Can you introduce Brainspotting to those who don't know it yet? What method it is and what can it be helpful for the most?
Okay, brain spotting is a healing modality. Because I'm a psychotherapist, it's usually seen as a psychotherapy, but it's used by people who are coaches and chiropractors and acupuncturists and medical doctors with specialties in the body, and particularly the spine. So if I say it's a psychotherapy, it's really more than a psychotherapy. But it makes use of visual processes. We say in brain spotting, where you look affects how you feel. In other words, if a person is upset about something and they look off to their left, it feels one way. If they then look off to their right, it feels a different way. Usually it's more intense on one side and less intense on the other side. But sometimes it's not just a difference of intensity, it's a difference of quality. So if it feels upsetting over here one way, even if it feels upsetting over here, there's usually a qualitative difference. It might be more anger over here and sadness over here. So with that, we say where you look affects how you feel, which is sort of the watchwords of brain spotting. A brain spotting therapist is always watching their client's eyes. When a client comes in and starts talking about their week or what they want to work on or something that's upsetting to them, their eyes will always go in a certain direction to either one spot or two or more spots. And in that way, the eyes are revealing, because the eyes are revealing, again, that there's something in that eye position that correlates to the activation in the nervous system. And as such, it reveals a portal into the nervous system. And there are other ways of finding what we call relevant eye positions. We call them relevant eye positions in contrast to random eye positions, and we use a pointer in brain spotting. If I was to take out the pointer and randomly put it over here and say, just look at this and focus on this, just that visual focus would change the person's neurobiology. Okay. But if I'm going across and the client is already activated around an issue, very activated, and I get over here and the client starts to blink and then does rapid fire blinking. That also indicates those reflexes also indicate that there's something right here in their visual system, again, that gets access deep into their brain, deep into their body, and into their nervous system. And just to add one more thing conceptually to this, trauma or emotional trauma, psychological trauma, is seen as as a situation that's so overwhelmed the nervous system that parts of that traumatic experience were left unprocessed in the nervous system. And because of that, anytime the brain or nervous system activity goes through those places of unprocessed trauma, the person has a reaction to it. The most classical reaction would be a flashback, So the idea that there's unprocessed trauma in the nervous system, that healing entails being able to find that unprocessed trauma and being able to hold the person's brain and nervous system's attention on that, allows it to process in the present in a way it wasn't able to process in the past. That goes for all trauma and all trauma therapies. But we have found in Brainspotting that there's something about the eyes and the visual processes that gets us direct access to the unprocessed trauma and help. And we not only have the person either look at the spot spontaneously or look at the pointer, we have them maintain the gaze on it. So they keep looking at it. So the nervous system not only finds the unprocessed trauma, it maintains the focus on it until it processes to the point that it's no longer there.
I have many questions. So first question, is your job as a therapist to, say, provoke the client or patient to find gaze spots that may provoke something that we haven't yet discovered about ourselves?
We don't have to provoke the client. It happens spontaneously from and within the client. So again, the client, had a terrible week and a terrible week at work or at home or so on. And they were coming in very upset. And we say, okay, what would you like to work on today? And they say, I had a terrible week. Not only eyes, but head and neck go like this. And they start talking, almost talking to that spot. We didn't provoke it. It just emerged naturally and spontaneously. Or if that same client, if we were going to use the pointer, okay, and again, the client said, I had this terrible week, and they told us about it. Say, where do you feel, clearly you're activated. Where do you feel that activation in your body? The client says, well, it feels like it starts in my chest and goes up to my throat.
What do you mean by activation?
Activation, when a person is upset, when we are upset, our bodies get activated. Okay. It's like your heart is racing, your breathing either increases or gets shallow, or parts of your body tighten up, particularly the chest, or sometimes you'll feel tension in your head. That's what we mean by activation. Okay. And that is part of how we discover the eye positions that best access this unprocessed trauma. So in that context, then we have two ways to use a pointer. Either you go slowly across the person's visual field. Let's say you get over here and the person's head snaps back out of nowhere. That's a cue to us that there's something in this eye position that relates to that unprocessed trauma, Or sometimes you'll come across here and the person's mouth will just go like that and their eyebrows go up. Those are cues. But we have another way of finding what we call these relevant eye positions, which is to ask the person where they feel it the most. Now they're already aware of how their body is activated, charged up. Do you feel it more looking to your right? Do you feel it more looking straight ahead? Or do you feel it to your left? And there's an appreciable difference between all those eye positions. So the spot where the person feels it the most, that eye position, is also visually a direct way to access the unprocessed trauma in the nervous system. And again, as I said before, once you find the spot, we guide the client to maintain their gaze on that spot and to observe their internal process, okay, which is when the nervous system starts to heal itself.
And this is a question also: how safe it is, and how does it work that you have such a also I guess based on your extreme experience with clients and with so many people you met already, but that this process will guide us towards healing and not towards maybe even more traumatizing experiences or memories that may flood us from the inside.
Well, natural processes are rarely, if ever, dangerous. And this is a natural phenomenon and a natural process. Now, you're raising another question. What if on this eye position, not only the trauma that you're looking for comes out, but other traumas come out, especially ones from earlier in life? Okay. Now, we don't see that as a danger. We see that as a healing opportunity. Because if a person, say, grew up in a very chaotic household and their mother was not physically and emotionally available to them the way they needed, and their father had issues of anger and rage and so on, because of that, they felt unsafe. And it really got bad when they were 3 years old, and it stayed bad until they were 6 years old. Okay. If we find that eye position that relates to a very upsetting week that they had at work, and some memories come out from when they were 6 or 5 or 3, okay, that's like finding where a wound is that the person didn't even know, an unhealed wound that they didn't even know that they had. Okay. And it may get activating for them, but it gets activating because we found where it hurts. You know, if someone has injured their arm and they see a medical professional, and that medical professional is trying to determine where it is, so they start feeling around, all of a sudden touch over here and say, ow, wait, it hurts. We don't see that as a problem. We see that the medical person has located wherever the pain is coming from, which then provides the opportunity to begin to bring some healing to it. There is a very small percentage of our population that is carrying terrible trauma from early in their lives, early single digits. And they manifest certain, what are called symptoms. We call them, again, manifestations. And they've seen 5 different therapists and didn't get better, sometimes got worse. And therapists call them a non-responder, or that they're treatment resistant, which is really like blaming someone who's suffering, and no one ever discovered that they had this, early trauma, severe early trauma that was, we call dissociated. The nervous system just hid it away. So it was affecting the person dramatically, and they didn't even know it existed. Now, when that comes out, sometimes that can flood out, or sometimes it can overwhelm a person. But at least we have finally found what the problem is. And and we don't just sit there and let the person, get in emotional trouble. You get very involved when that happens and say, okay, let's come back to me. Okay, can you feel your feet on the ground? We call this grounding. Can you feel your feet on the ground? You feel the chair supporting your body. Can you see my eyes, my face? Can you hear my voice? And, okay. But the alternative to that would be to say, well, Brainspotting is dangerous because it unleashes these powerful forces. Meanwhile, the person is now in their 40s and they've lived half a life because of this unprocessed, forgotten, dissociated trauma.
Do you believe that, so bringing from unconscious to conscious is already a part of healing. So bringing up or revealing memories that were hidden somewhere in the under the rug or somewhere deep inside of us, and we didn't even know that we were carrying them.
Well, you're asking a more complex question than you may realize. Okay. Freudian therapy, psychoanalysis, was based on the idea that the healing happens by making the unconscious conscious. Okay. And Freud was not working off of the brain-body models that we work on in 2026 and that are central to Brainspotting. The healing doesn't come solely or even primarily by bringing things from the unconscious to the conscious. The healing happens by holding the person's nervous system in such a way that the nervous system heals itself. And as that process goes on, it doesn't mean that everything comes to conscious awareness. A lot of things will heal and process through on an unconscious basis. I'll give a specific example. What we call memory is usually what is called explicit memory. In other words, primarily things that we can see. Okay. Sometimes things that we can hear or smell. But there is such a thing as implicit memory, which is things that we remember, but not in an explicit way. And the most primary way that we remember things implicitly is in our body with what we call body memories. Okay. So during the processing, there may be a lot of body memory experience, and it may move from one part of the body to the other, or gain in intensity or reduce in intensity until the body just kind of goes into a balance or quiescence. Okay. In that process, we call that body processing, which happens a lot in Brainspotting. In that process, the memories that are processing may be implicit memories and processing on an implicit basis. You know, if a memory is from very early in life, before we have language and thought, there's no way that it can process in ways that fit language and thinking processes. Those are, again, usually the most implicit memories. So if the person starts, and we use a rating scale of how activated are you, 0 to 10, and the person starts and they are activated at a level of 8, which is determined by how they feel it in their body, and they finish at 2, 1, or 0. Okay. There's been a tremendous amount of processing that's gone on. Most of it has happened so deeply and so quickly that the client even can't tell us what it is. That's where, the unconscious to the conscious, and then the verbalization is not the model, not the primary model of Brainspotting. But clients will say, I don't know what happened, okay, but I feel much better and it feels right. When they say, I don't know what happened, that's their conscious thinking selves making the comment about these deeper processes. I can see that you're reacting to that because
I am.
You're getting what I'm saying.
Yeah, totally. Because I have this sentence in my mind now that maybe we don't need to know everything because we are so, or maybe I am, attached to rational, logical thinking and explaining the process. And yet you are touching upon something that is extremely interesting also to me. And I want to develop that subject and theme in our conversation. So unknown. So the realm of unknown. And that...
Let me jump in with this. You're an artist, right?
I am.
Okay. Is art based on the rational, the logical, on what we know? Or is art based on the intuitive, and it's based on things coming from places in us that we don't really know what they are? When an actor embodies a character, okay, is that a logical practice? Do they sit down and say, well, let me figure this out? or do they do whatever they do, and we actually do it in Brainspotting, that they somehow drop down into character and start to feel the emotions of the character, even what the body experience of the character. Do memories come up that are organic to the character, but not to the actor? You know, it's the same kind of process. The process of healing in Brainspotting is very parallel to the process of creating that goes on in artists. You know, you talk about abstract art, you know, and you look at it, and there's nothing rational about that, but it evokes emotions in you, and you feel a connection to it. Okay, so so creative processes and what artists attempt to do and are able to accomplish, okay, comes from deep in the nervous system, the same way as trauma healing through Brainspotting comes from deep in the nervous system. And the healing is not in the knowing. The knowing comes after the healing. And the knowing is limited to the degree that the person understands the vast complexity of their nervous system.
Before I ask you about creativity, and maybe dig even deeper into what you said about trauma healing and creativity and nervous system, it's extremely interesting. But I would like to also go back a little bit to trauma, what you were saying, and something that also connects to that flow and feeling is time. When we are in that moment of memories, I can speak for my own experience, experiencing also Brainspotting work. And when something either traumatic for me emerged, or I had memories revealed from my very, very young age that I never ever connected them to the problems that I actually initially came with to therapy. It was a shock for me, and it made clear sense that they were connected. And I think it would take me, maybe never, but maybe years, by logical, rational step by step, if I wanted to draw a line. And yet it happened. But there is this sense and feeling of time, like it happens now. It's not a memory that is just being revealed. I really, as you are even now also talking about, for me, I can also relate as an actress, as an actor, that there are, in this state of flow of creativity, there are images or feelings that I feel, and they're not produced by my mind. So I'm not kind of like I'm not watching them, I'm living them. And it's so interesting, how does it happen, and what does it mean that we, it almost feels like time travel.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start by saying in Brainspotting, we don't use the term the mind because we work with the brain and the nervous system. When I was in graduate school, the teachers used to talk about the mind all the time. And then I raised my hand. This is many years ago. I said, where is the mind? Where does the mind exist? And they looked at me like we say here in the United States. They looked at me like I had three heads. Okay. The reason I asked the question was they were talking about a concept, a disembodied concept to describe human experience, Okay. In fact, the mind is a perception. Okay. But to understand trauma and understand healing trauma, you have to not go for concepts. You have to go for neurobiological realities. Okay. Now, you mentioned time. the human thinking brain, which is known as the neocortex, has time orientation to it. You drop down below the neocortex, we call the subcortex. There's no conception of time. Okay. There's also no language. Everything is intuitive. Everything is felt sense. Okay. So when it comes to unprocessed trauma, those places in the nervous system that hold the unprocessed trauma are experiencing a time past. If it was an attack that was done to you when you were 18 years old, in that unprocessed trauma, it's still the 18-year-old self, or the 18-year-old part of oneself. Okay. And if you have an I position and you're processing a car accident from 5 months ago, and this happened to you 20 years ago, and you start processing, and all of a sudden you start to say, wait a second, what's going on now? I'm seeing myself back in college, and the people in my dorm attacked me because they thought I had done something. And the time orientation, it changes because all of a sudden in that processing, the person is seeing and hearing and smelling and feeling in their body and feeling emotionally the attack experience, So trauma is timeless, for us, because it's not in an area of the brain that has time orientation. And when people start processing traumas that go back years and decades, they start by talking in the present tense. I'm getting hit now. I just fell to the ground. Okay.
Yeah.
As they process the trauma, this is really interesting. They start talking not in the present tense, but in the past tense. Okay. He was hitting me. Instead of from he's hitting me, he was hitting me. So the healing of the trauma liberates the person from being trapped at another time and place, and brings them back. And it's not like it didn't happen. It's not like it wasn't terrible, but it's in the past. Okay. And it's not right here in this location. It happened in my college dorm. Not here to me in this therapy office. And what happens is healing trauma through Brainspotting helps a person to go back and in experiential time to find themselves at the time of the trauma, which might be when they're 5 years old. Okay. And then do what we call as a time retrieval to bring that 5-year-old part of the self into the present, so it becomes, it's not happening. It happened. It was a terrible thing, but it's over and done. I survived it. And yes, and it cost me a lot. And the person starts to feel grieving, which is an organic way to come out of trauma, but I had the strength and the resilience to survive it, and I'm still here. So healing trauma is like a type of time travel.
Yeah, absolutely. As you were describing it now, I felt like thanks to Brainspotting work, I could enter a vehicle and travel into present from being trapped in the past. You said something that is very interesting. So some things are happening below words. So they are so deeply encoded in us that we don't even know that they are driving us. So, and we may not. So, from your experience, the healing? It's amazing that you said that we may not even, as clients, as patients, we may not even be aware that we start to use different language for the experience, and this is already a cue that we're traveling in time already. But do you also observe that we start to find words for some things that didn't have words yet to describe the experience, for example?
Sometimes, but not always. And the healing is not predicated on finding the words. The healing is predicated on the nervous system working through whatever, was still held in place. I'm going to answer a question that you haven't asked before you ask it, or you might not even ask it. And it is totally pertinent to the nature of your podcast, because it's about deep natural healing. Okay. The traditional model of psychotherapy is that the therapist is the expert, and the therapist, the client comes to the therapist, and the therapist starts by taking a history, and taking the history going back, and they have a list of questions, and they take it down. Meanwhile, the problem is a lot of the history is pre-verbal, or if it's trauma history, it's dissociated. The person doesn't have access to it, and they're using thought and words to take the history. Okay, when most of the history is somatic, it's just held in the body. But then the therapist, who's this expert, after they take this history, they form a diagnosis. This person has panic disorder, and the diagnosis, the last word of the diagnosis from the diagnosis books and codes is disorder. Okay. Now, meanwhile, if the person was very traumatized growing up, okay, there's nothing disordered about them. Whatever symptoms they have is a natural reaction to the frightening, painful, traumatizing experience. Okay, but it's called a disorder. If someone got attacked in the street, we would never say they have a beaten up disorder. Yeah. We recognize that the physical symptoms that they have, from the attack, were as a result of somebody doing something terrible to them. But by calling it a disorder, when it's developmental trauma, again, the therapist is now blaming the client. It's called, blaming the victim. And then after the therapist forms this diagnosis, that leads them to form a treatment plan. Okay. With treatment goals, so that it's a panic disorder. So we're going to use cognitive behavioral therapy and do cognitive restructuring and exposure therapy and all these kind of things. And the treatment plan and the treatment goals leads the therapist to do the interventions with the client from the therapist's expertise. Now, Brainspotting posits that is all incorrect. Number one, the therapist is not the expert. The client is the expert on their own nervous system because it exists inside of them. Number two, the therapist does not have the capacity to identify what the problem is and bring healing to it from the outside. Why? The human nervous system is the most complex mechanism known in the universe. The human nervous system has 1 to 4 quadrillion synaptic connections. What is a quadrillion? If you take 1 billion and you multiply it by 1 million, you get a quadrillion. That's how many synaptic connections are in the human nervous system. So this idea that this expert is going to be able to diagnose and set up a treatment plan, they're in the face, we call it the uncertainty principle. That because of the vast complexity of the human nervous system, the therapist or healing person is in a state of complete uncertainty and has no chance of understanding what it is, where it came from, where it's heading, what to do about it. Okay. This uncertainty principle, which is the cornerstone of Brainspotting, blows up the entire myth of psychotherapeutic wisdom for the last 100 years, and especially the last 20 to 30 years. If the therapist is in a state of total uncertainty, what does the therapist do? We say, in the face of uncertainty, all we have is the frame. What is the frame? The frame is the client's experience. But there's a very particular frame that the client has, which is that which led them to decide, I can't work this out on my own. I need help. I need to see a therapist. And then that frame is what led them to do the research that they did in order to find the therapist. So by the time that client comes for the first session, they are carrying to the first session the frame of their, we call it neuro experience, that which brought them there. What does the brain spotting therapist do? The brain spotting therapist is mindfully aware of this. Okay, it's not I have the wisdom, it's the client's bringing their frame in. And the brain spotting therapist mindfully receives the frame that the client brings. And it may be very literal and linear, or it might be highly abstract and non-linear. It doesn't matter because it is of the client. Okay. And then the therapist holds that frame with the client by being mindfully aware of it without trying to diagnose it or ask questions about it, because it's living and breathing in that moment. And then because of that, something happens that wasn't happening otherwise. The client's nervous system starts to go into what we call processing mode. And it's like a form of mindfulness. We call it focused mindfulness processing. And just like you were saying, they're doing it on a spot, which really gives that direct access to the nervous system. Mm-hmm. And it goes wherever it goes, and the client starts with an activation number of 8 and they finish with an activation number of 3. Okay. What is it that happened in that session? What is it that the therapist did and didn't do? Okay. The human nervous system has the capacity to heal itself. This is the payoff. This goes right to what your show is about. Okay. Nobody from the outside.
Very empowering
to hear that.
It is totally empowering. The therapist from the outside doesn't have the capacity to do it. It's the client's nervous system. And now the nervous system is compromised by the traumatic experiences that it had, starting when they were young and their nervous system was very undeveloped and very vulnerable. Okay. But just like the immune system, where if there's an infection, the immune system knows how to send the right T cells or white blood cells to those areas of the body to help it to heal. Or if you happen to cut yourself, you're slicing bread and hard bread and it slips and you cut your hand. Okay. Yes, a doctor can clean the infection and even if necessary, sew it up. But for the most part, the healing of that wound happens on its own. The human nervous system operates in the same way, but even more in a more complex way. So what the brain spotting therapist again receives the frame of the client's neuro experience mindfully and holds it with them in the context of uncertainty, the 1 to 4 quadrillion synaptic connections of the human nervous system, which is genius. The human nervous system is genius, even in a person who appears unintelligent. Their nervous system is genius. And by doing so, whether it happens in 1 session or 10 sessions or 100 sessions, depending on how many times the client was traumatized or wounded and how early it happened and how terrible the traumas were, the human nervous system, given the right circumstance, has the capacity to heal from the inside out and from the bottom up. And no therapist has the expertise to make it happen. But brain spotting therapists have the expertise to promote the circumstances with the client that it happens inside of themselves, spontaneously and organically. How do you like that, Arena?
It's a shift of paradigm, because from the position of knowing and having something fixed and having already a fixed knowledge, but also trying to fix someone, we come with deep respect to the vast resources and possibilities that our extremely complicated system may provide us if we treat it openly. This is what I receive from what you say.
And when a client receives this, it's an entirely different experience than when the person comes in like they're the expert and the client is the helpless one.
Yeah. Very that's why I felt very empowered when you were talking. But I have a question. Is Brainspotting possible to be included in therapy, in psychotherapy, talking psychotherapy, or it may be, is it alternative therapy, or it may find its way with different modalities?
Talk therapy, I mean, goes back decades. Freud called analysis the talking cure. It's better to not just say talk therapy, but to say relational therapy, because it's not the talking that results in the healing. It's the relationship that results in the healing. But if you're asking, can and is Brainspotting a primary mode of therapy? I would say absolutely. And contrasting it to talk therapy, remember the capacity for language is in the neocortex, that human thinking brain that has no capacity for changing what is in the deeper subcortical brain and nervous system. Healing happens from the bottom up. It happens from the deepest places in our nervous system, and then it comes towards conscious awareness. Healing, any kind of healing, doesn't happen from the top down. The information flows up. It doesn't, very little of it goes down. So people who will go for talk therapy with, talented talk therapists will often say, I understand all my problems, but I don't feel any different. That's because this part of the brain understands the problem, but there was no access to where the problem is held.
Yeah, the experience.
All experiences, all unprocessed trauma is held in the subcortex. It's held deep in the brain and deep in the body, deep in the nervous system. So if a person comes in and does 10 sessions of talk therapy before they start to do Brainspotting, it would have been so much better if they started doing Brainspotting from the first session. They say, well, what does Brainspotting work with? Well, it works with whatever the person is carrying in their nervous system. That applies to all human beings. The only requirement for the person to be able to respond to Brainspotting is that they have a living, breathing nervous system. As far as we know, it doesn't work with people whose nervous systems are no longer functioning because they've passed on. But remember, the Brainspotting therapist, this is crucial, and contrast Brainspotting to other technical therapies. And there are a lot of other technical therapies that are very effective and that are wonderful. But Brainspotting has a difference from all of them, which is that Brainspotting is not only a technical therapy, it's a relational therapy. We teach something that is not taught in the other model. The human relationship comes first when it comes to healing. Healing happens in the context of the relationship.
You mean a relationship also to therapist?
The therapeutic relationship, yeah.
Yeah.
Remember, I talked about the frame. Client brings the frame, therapist mindfully receives and holds it, and then they shape it together. They're holding that together. The foundation of that frame is the relational frame. It's human. It mirrors the original relationship, which is in utero with the mother carrying the child, and then afterward, in the first few days, weeks, months, and years of life between the baby and the primary caretaker or caretakers. That's the model for the relationship. But the relationship is not predicated solely or primarily on talking. It's predicated on attuned presence. And the only way that the therapist can have a tuned presence with the client is to trust the client, to listen to the client, to know that the client has the capacity for self-healing given the right circumstances, and to openly follow the client wherever they go. Okay. And in that way, it shows the foundation being that the therapist is totally mindful of the fact that the client has the capacity to heal inside of themselves. And the therapist holds this relational frame with them. And then it becomes a technical frame, with eye positions and things like that. And then the therapist is present with and observing the client's self-healing that is happening because of this relational frame and this technical frame.
But when you at the very beginning, you mentioned that we actually brain spot or gaze spot all the time. And actually, since reading your book, that maybe for those who forgot or are listening now, has just been released in Polish, and I really extremely recommend it. I related really to something you said about, or maybe I started to be more aware of looking up, looking down, looking right, looking left, depending on different or something that I'm searching for right now, for words or feelings. And I started to experiment myself. So on one hand, as I understand, we're talking about deep work that is connected to our traumas, to very deeply embedded experiences that are shaping us. On the other hand, of course, a question emerges: do we always need a relationship, or do we always need a therapist? Because this memory just came up for me of me just maybe past days. I was talking to someone. I wasn't on my own. I was talking to someone, and I started to experiment, to look different directions, to find the best focus that I can have, to be actually talking this subject most effectively. But as I understand, this touches upon a second big subject that I really, really want to ask you. It's a subject of resources and creativity. So something that is not a therapeutic work, digging into or unleashing memories or healing traumas, but there is a huge world that we can access. So what is your view on creativity?
The human nervous system is a genius of creativity 24 hours a day. Okay. Just being able to do everything that the nervous system does is so incredible as to be impossible. The only reason it's not impossible is because it happens. Every human being has the capacity for creativity. Doesn't mean that everybody's creative talent is the same. Although there are a lot of people who are creatively gifted where it doesn't get noticed, doesn't get, nurtured.
How do you define creativity and to be creative?
Well, I guess you go back to the word create,
Yeah.
It is the process of creating. And when it comes to, if you look at it in terms of art, it is being able to perceive the environment in a way that's different than everybody else is looking at it. It's looking at the same room and seeing an entirely different room, because it's looking at it much more in depth and much more openly and with much more curiosity. In acting, it's a matter of taking the human capacity to create a human being, to create a life, to create a history. Okay. But again, to do it through what we know intuitively. Now, actors usually go to acting school, and take acting classes or have acting coaches to develop this particular creative endeavor that we know how to do intuitively, and then what happens is when you start acting, every role you have, even if you have one line, an actor who has one line who takes it seriously is going to just want to deliver in that one line, a lot. But every time you create a new character, you develop a new character, which is also in relationship to the other characters, because you can have a monologue or a soliloquy where but even that you're still talking to the audience, but most, is in relationship. Every time you develop a new character, okay, you are getting deeper access to your own creative possibility, and the teaching, good acting teaching is not primarily here. It's the here that allows you to get to the here, in acting, every character that an actor will ever create already exists inside of them before they start creating them. And there is the potential for 1,000, 1,000,000, 1,000,000,000 other characters lies in that actor's nervous system. Okay. So
but it's endless. It may be endless.
It is endless, So, and that's why the idea, I just don't know how to play this character. The actor's deep nervous system does. And that's where the creative process comes in, where it starts to, with open curiosity and trust, explore different creative possibilities, character possibilities. But the thinking processes should come at the end, not at the beginning.
It's actually the same what you were describing in just healing process. It's exactly the same, where we just unleash ourselves into trust, into this, that it will guide us into good places, but not pre-designed by our rational mind. And for my, just very briefly, from my experience, how I experienced Brainspotting in acting work, it was actually effortless, because I'm not the one. I'm not the one trying to construct a character, perform a character. The feeling that I had was that I'm letting it be, and it guides me. The character inside guides me, and actually evolves. I get to know it better and better, and it was such a revelation. It changed my completely my point of view and how I perceive acting, but also, as I understand, creativity.
You can't separate the healing process from the creative process, and the creative process from the healing process. They go down, if you look at it just technically in the nervous system, it goes down the same pathways. And healing is a very creative process. Healing in the nervous system is very creative. Creativity for human beings brings about healing as well. I want to say just two things real quick, because I know we're almost finished. When it comes to graphic art, let's say a painting, okay, what's the hallmark of what makes a painting a great painting? It's when you look at it and you feel certain things, and let's say it's a portrait, and you really feel like you're looking at a human being. That painter was somehow able to use, canvas and paint to create something that is living and breathing, but it's how we feel it. If you take comedy, stand-up comedy, a comedian will look at something that everybody looks at from a different angle, which is the creative process, and will see things that are funny about it that nobody is seeing as funny, and will come up and portray it. And people then start to recognize how absurd certain things are, and they laugh. It all comes from the creative process, you know.
Mm.
But it all is because of the genius of the human nervous system.
Mm. When you mentioned now about also this position of receiver of someone's creative process, I also had this thought that it's also a creative process to be the one who perceives it from different angles. When something opens up, when we start to feel moved.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I've never thought of it from this angle, you know, but your comment is bringing this to me. The audience, you know, again, let's say it's live, it's a play, responds to the creative portrayal of a character. I guess because they have that character inside of themselves. You know, it's not just them, but their capacity to create a character is deeply intuitively touched upon and engaged, you know, and that's where, you know, that's where you feel from in the audience what's going on the stage. So I agree with what you're saying.
One last very short question to you. Do you believe that Brainspotting is still evolving, and where do you see it going?
I absolutely know it's evolving because it has evolved every year, every month, every day, from when I first noticed it, you know, 23 years ago. And B, I have absolutely no idea where it's evolving to. Okay, which is organic to what Brainspotting is about.
Yeah,
You know,
of course.
it is not controllable. It is not predictable. You know, but it is knowable in a larger sense, because nothing stays the same in this universe. Everything is always moving. You know, from molecular structures up to, you know, the stars and the galaxies. Everything's always moving, and that's why every healing modality, every therapy modality should be always evolving, even though many, if not most of them, are not. But it's unpredictable. And once you surrender to that, and once you embrace that, it's liberating.
Very, very. Thank you, David, so much. Great honor and great pleasure. I would love to, yeah. Vice versa, and hope to speak to you in the future. In the meantime, I do recommend to all of you great book, and also experiencing the power of Brainspotting. Have a good day.
You too.